Hey everyone, before we drift deeper into the unbelievably long story of life, where are you watching this video from? And what time is it where you are? Maybe you're already tucked in, cozy in bed, or perhaps you're winding down on the couch. Wherever you are, take a moment to really feel it. The quiet of the room, the gentle rhythm of your breathing, the softness of your pillow. This you might think is just a fleeting moment in your day. But what if I told you that this very moment, and every moment that came before it, is part of an unbroken chain stretching back billions of years? What if the life you're living right now, the body you inhabit, is the direct result of a slow, steady, and truly mind-boggling dance of change that began in a primordial soup, long before anything remotely resembling us existed? Think for a moment about the longest period of time you can truly wrap your head around. Maybe it's your entire lifetime, from your first cry to this very moment. Perhaps it's the history of your family, tracing back through generations of grandparents and great-grandparents. Or maybe, if you're a history buff, you can stretch your mind back to the ancient civilizations, the Romans, the Egyptians, or even further, to the first permanent settlements and the dawn of agriculture. We're talking about thousands of years, maybe 10,000 at the very most. That already feels like an eternity, doesn't it? The rise and fall of empires, the invention of writing, the construction of monumental structures that still stand today, all compressed into what feels like an impossibly long stretch. This is the timeline we, as humans, are comfortable with, the one our memories and our historical records generally operate within. It's the scale of human experience. Now I want you to take that mental image of 10,000 years, that seemingly endless scroll of human history, and imagine multiplying it not by 10 or 100 or even 1,000, but by 100,000. We're not just adding a few more zeros, we're fundamentally shifting our perception of duration. 10,000 years multiplied by 100,000 gives us 1 billion years. And the story we're about to tell, the story of life's evolution, doesn't just span 1 billion years, it spans nearly 4 billion years. The Earth itself is approximately 4.54 billion years old. Life, as we understand it, emerged relatively early on, perhaps around 3.8 to 4 billion years ago. So for almost 4 billion years, this planet has been a living, breathing laboratory, a stage for the most incredible, improbable, and continuous experiment imaginable. Trying to truly feel the weight of 4 billion years is like trying to hold the ocean in a teacup. It's too vast, too immense for our everyday brains, which are wired to operate on scales of seconds, minutes, days, and perhaps a few decades. Our personal experiences, our historical records, even the entire span of human civilization, are but a whisper, a blink of an eye, in the grand sweep of geological time. And yet, understanding this scale, even if we can't fully grasp it emotionally, is absolutely fundamental to understanding evolution. Because evolution is not about rapid, dramatic transformations happening overnight. It is, as our title suggests, a slow dance. It's the accumulation of countless tiny changes, nudges, and adjustments, adding up over countless generations, over countless eons. Let's try some analogies, imperfect as they may be, to help us wrap our minds around this concept. Imagine the entire history of the Earth, from its fiery birth to this very second, compressed into a single calendar year, starting on January 1st. On this cosmic calendar, each day represents roughly 12.5 million years. January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October. For the vast majority of this calendar year, the Earth is here, cooling, forming, bombarded by asteroids, its surface solidifying, oceans gathering. But for all practical purposes, it's a sterile planet. No life, no rustling leaves, no chirping birds, no buzzing insects, just geological forces, volcanic eruptions, the slow grinding of continental plates. It's not until late February or early March that the very first signs of life, simple single-celled organisms, might appear. Imagine them, tiny, microscopic, silently reproducing in the early oceans. And that's it. For months and months on our cosmic calendar, the only life forms on Earth are these microscopic specks. No fish, no plants, No dinosaurs, just bacteria, archaea, and other single-celled wonders, silently doing their thing, slowly changing, slowly evolving, but remaining unseen, unheard, and unappreciated by anything larger. We fast forward through the long, quiet spring and summer. Life is there, quietly thriving in the oceans, getting more complex at the cellular level, learning new tricks like photosynthesis, the ability to harness sunlight for energy, which dramatically changes the Earth's atmosphere, slowly filling it with oxygen, a gas that was once toxic to most early life forms, but became essential for the more complex life to come. This period, known as the Great Oxidation Event, was itself a slow-motion revolution, taking hundreds of millions of years to unfold. It's hard to imagine, but the very air we breathe, the air that sustains us, was a manufactured product of early life, a testament to the cumulative power of billions of tiny organisms over vast stretches of time. It's not until late October, almost the end of the year, that multi-celled organisms finally make a significant appearance. Imagine that. For 10 months of our cosmic calendar, life was exclusively microscopic. Now larger forms, still strange and alien to our modern eyes, begin to emerge in the seas. We're talking about creatures that look nothing like modern animals, peculiar soft-bodied forms that fossil records hint at, paving the way for more complex designs. Then comes November, and a burst of diversification, often called the Cambrian explosion, where many of the basic body plans we recognize today suddenly appear. This was not an explosion in the literal sense of a sudden bang, but rather a rapid, by geological standards still tens of millions of years, appearance of diverse, complex animal life. Still, no life on land. The continents remain barren, sculpted by wind and water, but silent. December arrives, and the pace quickens for us, though still impossibly slow from a human perspective. Early plants begin to colonize the land in early December. The first forests slowly emerge. Then insects, followed by amphibians, creeping out of the water, adapting to a terrestrial existence. The first true reptiles evolve. Dinosaurs, those magnificent beasts that dominated the planet for so long, rule from mid-December for about 2 weeks. A long reign from our perspective, but still a relatively brief segment of the cosmic calendar. Christmas Day on our cosmic calendar sees the extinction of the dinosaurs, clearing the stage for the rise of mammals. The last week of December sees mammals diversify and spread across the globe, filling the ecological niches left vacant by the dinosaurs. And then finally, when does humanity, Homo sapiens, make its grand entrance? On December 31st, at around 11:45 p.m., the last 15 minutes of the entire year, all of recorded human history, from the invention of writing, to the pyramids, to the Roman Empire, to the Industrial Revolution, to the age of the internet, happens in the very last minute of December 31st. Your own life, your grandparents' lives, every ancestor you can imagine, is compressed into the last few seconds before midnight. That's how short our time here has been, and that's how long the Earth has been evolving, and how long life has been on its incredible journey. Why is this scale so critical? Because evolution isn't an event, it's a process. It's not a single transformation, but a continuous accumulation of countless tiny, imperceptible changes. Think of it like a massive sculpture, being carved by a sculptor who only takes one incredibly tiny chip off the stone every million years. From day to day, year to year, you wouldn't notice a difference. From generation to generation, you wouldn't see it. But give that sculptor 4 billion years, and what you'd have at the end would be something breathtakingly intricate and magnificent, something completely different from the original block of stone. That's evolution. It's the sum of countless small adjustments, driven by the relentless, patient forces of nature. The deep time of Earth's history isn't just a backdrop. It's the very canvas and the brushstrokes of evolution. Without this immense duration, the complexity, the diversity, and the sheer ingenuity of life would simply not be possible. It takes millions of years for new species to arise, for continents to drift, for climates to shift dramatically, for mountains to rise and erode, for oceans to form and recede. These geological changes, slow and immense, are the very pressures that drive evolutionary change, selecting for different traits, isolating populations, and creating new opportunities for life to adapt and diversify. Consider the simple act of breathing the air around you. That air, rich in oxygen, is fundamental to your existence. But the Earth's early atmosphere was very different, hostile, with very little free oxygen. It took billions of years for life itself, specifically the evolution of photosynthetic organisms like cyanobacteria, to gradually transform the atmosphere, slowly pumping out oxygen as a waste product, turning our planet from a reddish, anoxic world into the blue-green, oxygen-rich world we know today. This was not a quick transformation. It was a planetary-scale terraforming project undertaken by microscopic life over literally billions of years, a testament to the power of accumulated small-scale biological activity. Without that transformation, complex, oxygen-breathing life forms like us could never have existed. Understanding deep time also helps us understand why we don't see massive evolutionary leaps happening in a single lifetime, or even over a few hundred years. It's a common misconception that evolution is about an ape suddenly giving birth to a human, or a fish instantly sprouting legs. That's not how it works. Instead, imagine a population of animals, say a group of rabbits. Within that population, there's natural variation. Some rabbits might be a bit faster, some a bit more camouflaged, some have slightly thicker fur. If the environment changes, perhaps a new predator arrives, or the climate gets colder, those rabbits with the advantageous traits are slightly more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass on those traits to their offspring. Over hundreds, thousands, and millions of generations, these tiny advantages accumulate. The population as a whole gradually shifts. Eventually, after enough time and enough accumulated changes, these rabbits might look so different from their distant ancestors and be so genetically distinct that they would be considered an entirely new species. This is the slow dance. This is the power of infinitesimal changes compounding over unimaginable stretches of time. Our modern scientific understanding of deep time wasn't always accepted. For much of human history, prevailing beliefs, often rooted in religious texts, suggested a much younger Earth, perhaps only a few thousand years old. It was a radical idea, a profound paradigm shift, when early geologists and naturalists began to observe the Earth around them with new eyes. They looked at vast canyons carved by rivers, layers of rock stacked miles deep, containing fossilized remnants of creatures long extinct, and they began to realize that such formations and transformations simply could not have happened in mere millennia. They required eons. One of the key figures in this realization was a Scottish natural philosopher named James Hutton in the late 18th century. He was a man deeply attuned to the natural world, a keen observer of the rocks and landscapes of his native Scotland. Hutton noticed things that others had simply taken for granted. He saw rivers carrying sediment to the sea, slowly eroding mountains, and then saw that same sediment accumulating in layers, eventually hardening into new rock. He saw volcanic activity creating new land, and then saw that land slowly being weathered away. He deduced that these processes, which were clearly happening in his own lifetime, albeit imperceptibly slowly to the casual observer, must have been happening for an unimaginably long time to create the immense geological features he witnessed. He examined what he called unconformities, places where rock layers were tilted or folded, then eroded flat, and then new layers were deposited on top. These features, he argued, represented vast gulfs of time, periods of uplift, erosion, and new deposition, each taking millions of years. His famous conclusion, after studying these geological formations, was that he found no vestige of a beginning, no prospect of an end to the Earth's history. This was a radical departure from the prevailing thought of his time, which often held to a literal interpretation of biblical chronology, placing the Earth's creation just a few thousand years prior. Hutton's work was foundational, proposing a cyclical view of Earth's history, where rocks were constantly being formed, uplifted, eroded, and reformed, a continuous process requiring immense stretches of time. Building on Hutton's insights, another influential figure, Charles Lyell, published his groundbreaking work, Principles of Geology. In the early 19th century, Lyell championed the principle of uniformitarianism. This principle, elegantly simple yet profoundly powerful, states that the same geological processes we observe today, such as erosion, volcanic eruptions, sedimentation, and earthquakes, have been operating throughout Earth's history, and largely at the same rates. Uniformitarianism was a direct challenge to the opposing view, catastrophism, which argued that Earth's features were primarily formed by sudden, short-lived, violent events on a young planet. Lyell's meticulous observations and detailed arguments provided compelling evidence that the slow, steady work of geological forces over eons could account for the Earth's complex surface. His work was revolutionary because it provided the necessary time frame for natural processes to shape the Earth. And this is where Darwin enters the picture. Charles Darwin, when he embarked on his voyage on the HMS Beagle, took a copy of Lyell's Principles of Geology with him. As he observed the geological formations and the distribution of species across the globe, particularly in the Galapagos Islands, Lyell's ideas about deep time and gradual change profoundly influenced his thinking. Darwin realized that if the Earth was indeed ancient, offering an immense canvas of time, then the small natural variations he observed within species, combined with the pressures of the environment, what he later called natural selection, could, over countless generations, lead to the staggering diversity and adaptation of life. Without Lyell's deep time, Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection would have lacked the crucial ingredient, enough time for such slow incremental changes to accumulate and produce new species. It simply wouldn't have been plausible on a young Earth. The two ideas, deep time and evolution, were intrinsically linked, each strengthening the other. Today, our understanding of Earth's age isn't just based on geological observation. It's confirmed with remarkable precision by radiometric dating. This scientific technique uses the decay of radioactive isotopes within rocks to act as incredibly accurate atomic clocks. Here's the basic idea explained simply. Imagine you have a large pile of sand, and mixed into that sand are a few grains of glitter. Now imagine that over time, each glitter grain slowly, predictably, turns into a different colored pebble. If you know exactly how long it takes for half of the glitter grains to turn into pebbles, this is called the half-life, and you measure how much glitter and how many pebbles you have in your pile, you can figure out how long ago that process started. In the case of radiometric dating, the glitter is a radioactive element, like uranium-238, and the pebble is the stable element it decays into, like lead-206. These radioactive elements decay at a constant, predictable rate, unaffected by temperature, pressure, or chemical reactions. Their decay rates are known with incredible precision. So when scientists find a rock, they can measure the ratio of the parent radioactive isotope to its daughter stable isotope. By knowing the half-life of that particular radioactive element, they can calculate how many half-lives have passed since the rock solidified and trapped those elements within its structure. It's like having a stopwatch that started ticking the moment the rock formed. When scientists apply this technique to the oldest rocks on Earth, such as those found in Canada or Australia, they consistently get ages in the range of 3.8 to 4 billion years. And when they analyze meteorites, which are remnants from the formation of our solar system and haven't undergone the same geological processes as Earth rocks, they yield ages of approximately 4.54 billion years. This 4.54 billion years is widely accepted as the age of the Earth and the solar system. This independently confirms the profound antiquity of our planet, providing a robust quantitative measure of deep time. It's not just a guess or a philosophical idea, it's a measurable scientific fact. So when we talk about billions of years, we're not speaking in vague, poetic terms. We're talking about a scientifically measured, corroborated time frame. It's a number so large, it humbles us, yet it's precisely this gargantuan scale that provides the canvas for the miracle of evolution. It's this immense stretch of time that allowed for the trial and error, the countless mutations, the subtle pressures, and the vast extinctions that have shaped every living thing on this planet. Imagine the sheer number of generations that have passed in 4 billion years. For simple, fast reproducing bacteria, which can divide every 20 minutes, that could be an incomprehensible number, trillions upon trillions of generations. Even for organisms that reproduce more slowly, like elephants, which might have a new generation every 20-30 years, millions of generations would have passed. Each generation offers an opportunity for new variations to arise through random mutations in DNA, for advantageous traits to be selected by the environment, and for the slow, relentless march of change to continue. Evolution is truly a story of accumulation. It's not about big, dramatic leaps, but tiny, almost imperceptible nudges that, given enough time, can lead to monumental transformations. This chapter is just the prelude, the setting of the stage, but before we can even introduce the first actors in this grand play, the very first forms of life, it was essential to truly grasp the scale of the stage itself. The slow dance of evolution is slow precisely because its tempo is measured in eons, its rhythms in geological epochs, and its movements in the accumulation of changes across unimaginably many generations. This profound understanding of deep time allows us to appreciate the true power of evolution, a power that, given enough time, can turn the simplest building blocks into the dazzling complexity of a rainforest, the intricate beauty of a coral reef, or the profound wonder of a human mind. As we move forward, remember this sense of scale. Keep in your mind's eye that vast cosmic calendar, with all of human history confined to its very last minutes. This perspective will be your guide as we now pivot from the immense silent stretches of geological time to the moment, perhaps surprisingly early in that history, when something truly extraordinary happened, when the non-living began to stir, when chemistry gave way to biology, and the first whispers of life echoed through the ancient oceans. The stage is set, the time is vast. Now let's find the spark, that utterly improbable, yet ultimately inevitable, beginning that set this entire, long, slow dance in motion. We are about to delve into a period of Earth's history that is shrouded in mystery, pieced together by the faintest whispers from the distant past, where the very definition of life began to take shape. We've just spent a considerable amount of mental energy stretching our minds to grasp the almost unfathomable expanse of deep time, that 4.5 billion year canvas upon which the story of life is painted. We established that evolution isn't a sudden leap, but a meticulous, cumulative dance, where countless minute steps add up to monumental shifts, much like a mountain range slowly rising over millions of years, or a canyon being carved by a river, drop by drop. Now, with that sense of vast, patient duration firmly etched in our minds, we turn our attention to the most profound and mysterious step in this entire dance, the very first one. How did life begin? How did the inanimate, the inert, the mere collection of atoms and molecules coalesce into something that could move, grow, reproduce, and ultimately evolve? This is the story of the spark of life, from soup to single cells. Imagine the Earth as it was perhaps 4 billion years ago. Forget the lush green continents, the sprawling oceans teeming with fish, the birds soaring through blue skies. That image is light years away from the reality of early Earth. Instead, picture a world far more alien than anything in science fiction. The young Earth, still reeling from its violent formation, was a tumultuous, fiery place. Its surface, though cooled enough for liquid water to exist, was probably a scarred landscape of volcanoes belching gases and lava, constantly reshaped by intense geological activity. The atmosphere was thick, opaque, and choked with gases like carbon dioxide, methane, ammonia, and water vapor, a far cry from the breathable air we enjoy today. There was little to no free oxygen. The skies would have been dark and stormy, perhaps perpetually overcast. The oceans, vast and warm, weren't the clear blue waters we know, but likely murky, greenish, and rich in dissolved minerals and a soup of simple chemical compounds. Energy was abundant, but in forms we'd find hostile: ferocious lightning storms, intense ultraviolet radiation from a sun that lacked Earth's protective ozone layer, and the scorching heat from volcanic vents, both on land and deep beneath the nascent oceans. This was a planet in its raw, formative years, a chaotic laboratory of extreme conditions, yet it was in this crucible that life, against all apparent odds, somehow emerged. The question of how life arose from non-living matter, a process known as abiogenesis, is one of the most fundamental and challenging questions in science. It's important to distinguish this from evolution. Evolution explains how life, once it began, diversified and changed over time. Abiogenesis seeks to explain that initial, critical step, the transition from chemistry to biology. It's not a single simple event, but a series of interconnected stages, each building upon the last, like intricate steps in a cosmic dance. Our current scientific understanding of abiogenesis doesn't involve a divine spark or a miraculous single moment. Instead, it proposes a series of plausible chemical and physical processes that, given enough time, and remember our deep time, could have gradually led to the first self-replicating, self-sustaining systems. Think of it as a gradual climb up a ladder, where each rung is a crucial chemical innovation. The first rung on this ladder was the formation of simple organic molecules. You see, organic doesn't necessarily mean living in a scientific context. It simply refers to molecules containing carbon, often bonded with hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. These are the basic building blocks of life. Amino acids, the components of proteins; nucleotides, the components of DNA and RNA; simple sugars, and fatty acids. For a long time, it was thought that only living organisms could produce these complex organic compounds. However, famous experiments like the Miller-Urey experiment in the 1950s shattered this notion. Stanley Miller and Harold Urey recreated the conditions of early Earth in a laboratory flask, complete with a primordial soup of water, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen, zapped with electrical sparks to simulate lightning. Within a week, they found that amino acids and other organic compounds had spontaneously formed in their flask. This was a groundbreaking discovery, because it demonstrated that the basic chemical ingredients for life could arise naturally from non-living matter under early Earth conditions. Since then, further research has shown that organic molecules could have formed in a variety of ways on early Earth, not just from lightning in the atmosphere, but also from volcanic activity at deep-sea hydrothermal vents, sometimes called black smokers or white smokers, due to the mineral-rich fluids they emit, or even delivered by meteorites and comets crashing into the young planet. These celestial bodies, we now know, are rich in complex organic compounds, suggesting that the building blocks of life might have been raining down on early Earth from space. So, the early Earth likely became awash in a dilute, warm, primordial soup, a vast ocean filled with these basic organic molecules, the foundational bricks of life. The next critical step, the second rung on our ladder, was the polymerization of these simple molecules into complex chains. Life isn't just made of amino acids, it's made of proteins, which are long chains of amino acids. Life isn't just made of nucleotides, it's made of DNA and RNA, which are long chains of nucleotides. The challenge here is that in a dilute watery solution, these molecules tend to break apart rather than link up. So, where could this happen? Scientists propose several environments: evaporating tidal pools where molecules could become concentrated, or more prominently, on the surfaces of minerals, particularly clays, which could have acted as catalysts, attracting and concentrating the molecules, facilitating their bonding into longer chains. Think of these mineral surfaces as tiny workshops, providing a scaffold and energy for these crucial chemical reactions to occur. The surfaces of pyrite, fool's gold, or certain clays, for instance, have been shown in laboratory experiments to help simple organic molecules link up into more complex polymers. But having complex molecules like proteins and nucleic acids isn't enough. The true magic, the third and arguably most crucial rung, is self-replication. Life, by definition, can make copies of itself. Before DNA, the complex, stable molecule that carries our genetic code, scientists believed there was an RNA world. RNA, or ribonucleic acid, is a molecule very similar to DNA, but with a few key differences. Crucially, some RNA molecules, called ribozymes, can do something extraordinary. They can act as both genetic information carriers and as catalysts, meaning they can speed up chemical reactions, much like proteins do. Imagine this: in the primordial soup, among the jumbled assortment of organic molecules, some RNA strands might have formed randomly. A few of these RNA strands, just by chance, might have had a shape that allowed them to act as a template for other nucleotides to line up against, thus facilitating the creation of a copy of themselves. Even more remarkably, some of these random RNA strands might have developed the ability to catalyze their own replication or the replication of other RNA molecules. This is the RNA world hypothesis, a period early in life's history where RNA molecules performed both the job of storing genetic information, like DNA, and doing the work of catalysis, like proteins. This is a monumental step, as it provides a plausible mechanism for the inheritance of information, the very foundation of evolution. Small errors in replication, or mutations, in these early RNA strands would have created variation, and those variations that led to more efficient replication would have been selected for, beginning a rudimentary form of natural selection even before true cells existed. The fourth rung, equally vital, was encapsulation, the formation of membranes. Imagine you have all these fantastic self-replicating RNA molecules floating in the vast ocean. How do they maintain their integrity? How do they keep their internal chemistry separate from the chaotic external environment? The answer lies in simple fat molecules, known as lipids. When lipids are placed in water, they spontaneously arrange themselves into spherical structures called vesicles or micelles, essentially tiny bubbles with a double-layered wall. This is because one end of a lipid molecule is water-loving, hydrophilic, and the other end is water-fearing, hydrophobic. In water, they naturally orient themselves to form a protective barrier, keeping their water-fearing tails away from the water, while their water-loving heads face outwards. These lipid bubbles could have randomly enclosed some of those self-replicating RNA molecules, along with other useful organic compounds. Suddenly, you have a contained unit, a protocell. This protocell now has an internal environment that is distinct from its surroundings, allowing for a more controlled and efficient chemistry. If the RNA inside was replicating, and if it produced something that helped the protocell's membrane grow or divide, then those protocells would have had an advantage. They could grow, pinch off, and create daughter protocells, each carrying a copy of the internal RNA instructions. This is the birth of the concept of a cell, a discrete, self-contained unit, capable of maintaining itself and reproducing. Finally, the fifth rung, inextricably linked to the others, is the development of a rudimentary metabolism. A protocell needs energy to replicate its RNA, to grow its membrane, and to perform its internal chemistry. Early metabolic pathways would have been very simple, perhaps harnessing energy from chemical reactions with minerals, or from the organic molecules in the primordial soup itself. As these early protocells became more efficient at acquiring energy and using it to fuel their internal processes, they would have outcompeted less efficient ones. This is where the earliest forms of life truly began to emerge, not just isolated molecules, but integrated systems that could take in resources, process them, grow, and reproduce. So this wasn't a sudden event, but a protracted sequence of lucky circumstances and chemical innovations spanning millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of years, occurring across various environments on the early Earth. From simple atoms to simple organic molecules, to complex polymers, to self-replicating RNA inside membranes, gradually developing basic metabolic capabilities. This protracted, patient process is critical to understand. It aligns perfectly with our understanding of deep time. It wasn't a snap of the fingers, but an incredibly slow dance of chemical evolution, culminating in the first biological entities. The earliest true life forms, these primordial cells, would have been what we call prokaryotes. These are single-celled organisms that lack a nucleus or other complex internal structures found in more advanced cells. Think of them as incredibly efficient, minimalist survival machines. They would have been anaerobic, meaning they thrived in an environment without oxygen, as free oxygen was still scarce and largely toxic to them. They would have lived off the organic compounds readily available in the ancient oceans, or perhaps harnessed energy from the chemical reactions around hydrothermal vents. And these first cells, once they emerged, immediately began their own slow dance of evolution. With self-replication came variation, and with variation came the raw material for natural selection. Some cells would have been slightly better at acquiring nutrients, or slightly more resilient to environmental stresses, or slightly more efficient at replicating their genetic material. These advantageous traits, however small, would have given them a competitive edge, leading to their more successful reproduction and proliferation. Over countless generations, the descendants of these most successful early cells would have come to dominate. This period, often called the Archean Eon, spanning from about 4 billion to 2.5 billion years ago, was dominated by these microscopic, single-celled life forms. For over 1.5 billion years, prokaryotes were the sole inhabitants of Earth. Imagine that, a world teeming with life, but invisible to the naked eye. Life was confined mostly to the oceans, protected from the harsh UV radiation that bombarded the surface. And during this immense stretch of time, these tiny organisms were doing something truly monumental. They were transforming the planet itself. The most significant of these transformations was brought about by the evolution of photosynthesis. Initially, some early cells likely performed a simpler form of photosynthesis that didn't produce oxygen, but eventually, a revolutionary innovation occurred: the evolution of oxygenic photosynthesis, specifically by a group of bacteria called cyanobacteria, sometimes referred to as blue-green algae. These tiny powerhouses discovered how to harness the energy of sunlight to convert carbon dioxide and water into sugars, releasing oxygen as a waste product. This was a game-changer of epic proportions. For billions of years, the Earth's atmosphere had been largely anoxic, but as cyanobacteria multiplied and spread throughout the oceans, tirelessly performing photosynthesis, they began to pump vast quantities of oxygen into the environment. This didn't happen overnight. Oh no, remember our deep time. This was the Great Oxidation Event, a process that unfolded over hundreds of millions of years. It was a slow, geological-scale poisoning of the planet for organisms that had evolved in an oxygen-free world. Oxygen was a corrosive, reactive gas, lethal to many of the anaerobic life forms. The Great Oxidation Event was a time of immense evolutionary pressure and dramatic change. Many anaerobic organisms perished or were forced into oxygen-free refuges, such as deep-sea vents or sediment layers. But for others, it was an unprecedented opportunity. Over countless generations, some lineages of prokaryotes evolved ways to not only tolerate oxygen, but to use it. They developed metabolic pathways that could harness oxygen to extract far more energy from food than anaerobic processes could. This was a critical turning point, paving the way for the eventual evolution of larger, more complex, and more energetic life forms. It's hard to overstate the significance of this event. The oxygen in our atmosphere, the very breath we take, is a direct, ancient legacy of these pioneering single-celled organisms. Their patient, persistent photosynthesis, accumulated over millions of centuries, literally terraformed an entire planet. Throughout this early period, the slow dance of evolution continued among these single-celled entities. They explored different metabolic strategies, adapted to various niches, and diversified into countless lineages. Even though they remained microscopic, the sheer biomass and chemical activity of these early prokaryotes were immense. Shaping their environment in profound ways, they formed vast microbial mats, some of which are preserved as ancient stromatolites, layered rock formations created by communities of cyanobacteria and other microbes, which are among the oldest direct evidence of life on Earth. These fossilized mats, found in places like Western Australia, are silent monuments to the patient, persistent work of early life, slowly, painstakingly transforming the face of the planet. So, from a chaotic, non-living early Earth, through a series of plausible chemical steps, and over a time span that beggars belief, the first simple cells emerged. These were not complex creatures with specialized organs or intricate behaviors. They were minimalist, single-celled powerhouses, driven by the fundamental imperative to replicate. But within them lay the blueprint for all future life. They carried the nascent genetic code, the basic machinery for metabolism, and the ability to reproduce. They were the very first dancers in the slow, grand choreography of evolution. And for the vast majority of Earth's history, life would remain at this single-celled stage. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? For billions of years, the Earth was a microbial planet. Everything you know, every animal, every plant, every fungus, every visible form of life, all descended from these microscopic ancestors. The stage was set, the first dancers had taken their positions, and they were beginning to transform their very surroundings. But the dance was only just beginning. The next great leap, the development of something far more complex than a simple prokaryote, would require even more time, more innovation, and a fundamental restructuring of the cellular blueprint. The journey from these solitary, efficient single cells to something truly astounding, something with internal compartments and the promise of multicellularity, was a dance step of monumental proportions, awaiting its cue in the deep, silent expanse of time. All right, let us continue our journey through the incomprehensible stretches of deep time. We just left the Earth, a planet dominated by unseen, microscopic life, the prokaryotes. These were the first true dancers on our cosmic stage. Those resilient, single-celled organisms that not only thrived in an oxygen-free world, but through the patient, persistent work of cyanobacteria and their revolutionary photosynthesis, slowly but surely began to terraform the entire planet, filling its atmosphere with oxygen, a toxic gas to many, but a powerful fuel for the evolution to come. For nearly 2 billion years, these tiny, simple cells were the only actors, a monumental span of time, yet in the grand narrative of life, merely the prologue. Now the stage is set for an innovation so profound, so utterly transformative, that it would unlock an entirely new level of biological complexity, the evolution of the eukaryotic cell, and then the astonishing dawn of multicellularity. This is the great diversification, life's explosive innovations. Imagine for a moment a tiny primordial prokaryotic cell floating in the ancient ocean. It's a marvel of minimalist efficiency, a simple bag of biochemical reactions, its genetic material, DNA, coiled directly within its cytoplasm. No internal compartments, no specialized organelles. It efficiently takes in nutrients, metabolizes energy, and divides to make copies of itself. This basic blueprint served life well for billions of years, creating a vast and diverse microbial world. But it was a blueprint with limitations, a single-room dwelling without specialized areas for different functions. Then, a revolution occurred. Not a sudden dramatic event, but another slow dance, a series of incremental steps, and critically, an extraordinary act of biological cooperation. This was the birth of the eukaryotic cell, the kind of cell that makes up all plants, animals, fungi, and protists. In essence, all complex life. The defining characteristic of a eukaryotic cell is its internal complexity. It possesses a true nucleus, housing its genetic material in a protected compartment, and a host of other specialized membrane-bound organelles, like tiny factories within the cell, each performing a specific function. Think of it as upgrading from a simple, open-plan studio apartment to a multi-room house with dedicated kitchens, bedrooms, and workshops. The leading scientific explanation for how these complex eukaryotic cells arose is one of the most compelling and beautiful stories in biology, the endosymbiotic theory. It's a tale of ancient, desperate alliances. Imagine a relatively large, ancient anaerobic prokaryote, perhaps one that had already evolved the ability to engulf other, smaller particles as a food source. Now, picture a smaller, highly efficient aerobic oxygen-using bacterium, one of the new breed that could handle and even thrive on the oxygen being pumped into the atmosphere by cyanobacteria. This smaller bacterium had a special trick. It could use oxygen to break down food molecules and generate a vast amount of energy. The endosymbiotic theory suggests that, at some point, billions of years ago, the larger anaerobic cell engulfed the smaller aerobic bacterium. But instead of digesting it, a truly extraordinary thing happened. The smaller bacterium survived inside its host. Perhaps it offered its host a slight advantage. Maybe it helped detoxify some of the accumulating oxygen. Or perhaps it leaked some of the excess energy it was producing. Over vast stretches of time, this accidental cohabitation became a permanent, mutually beneficial relationship. The host cell provided a safe, stable environment and resources. The engulfed bacterium, now no longer an independent organism but an organelle, provided a massively efficient way to generate energy from oxygen. This was the birth of the mitochondrion, the powerhouse of virtually all eukaryotic cells today. Every breath you take, every muscle contraction, every thought you have is powered by these tiny ancient bacterial descendants residing within your cells. They even retain their own small circular DNA, separate from the cell's main DNA, a compelling echo of their independent past. The story doesn't end there. Later, in a separate but equally profound event, some of these early eukaryotic cells, already possessing mitochondria, went on to engulf another type of bacterium, a photosynthetic cyanobacterium. Again, instead of being digested, this engulfed bacterium survived and became the chloroplast, the organelle responsible for photosynthesis in plants and algae. This is why plant cells have both mitochondria for energy and chloroplasts for food production, while animal cells only have mitochondria. This incredible series of mergers, of cells literally incorporating other cells, explains the fundamental structure and energy-generating capabilities of all complex life. It's a powerful testament to the long, slow, opportunistic dance of evolution. Not just competition, but also cooperation and incorporation, leading to entirely new levels of complexity. The evolution of the eukaryotic cell was a prerequisite for everything that followed. With a nucleus to protect and organize its vast amount of DNA, with mitochondria providing abundant energy, and with a complex internal membrane system for synthesizing and transporting molecules, the eukaryotic cell gained capabilities far beyond its prokaryotic ancestors. It could grow much larger, specialize its internal functions, and crucially, it opened the door to the next monumental step in life's slow dance, multicellularity. For billions of years, life had been primarily single-celled. But what if individual cells started to cooperate? What if they stuck together after dividing, forming clumps, then colonies, and eventually highly organized structures where different cells performed different jobs? This is the essence of multicellularity, and it wasn't a single invention, but a gradual continuum occurring independently multiple times in different lineages. The transition to multicellularity likely began with simple aggregation. Imagine a group of single-celled organisms, perhaps algae, that found some advantage in remaining loosely associated after cell division. Maybe it offered some protection from predators or allowed them to collectively access nutrients more efficiently. Over eons, some of these loose associations might have developed rudimentary forms of cooperation, where some cells performed one task and others another. This is the initial step, the division of labor. Why was this advantageous? Think about it. A single cell is a jack of all trades. It has to do everything: find food, defend itself, reproduce. But a multicellular organism can specialize. Some cells can become highly efficient at capturing light, like in a plant leaf, others at absorbing nutrients, like root cells, others at moving the organism, like muscle cells, and still others at reproduction, like germ cells. This specialization leads to far greater efficiency and complexity. An organism made of many specialized cells can grow much larger than a single cell, access entirely new resources, develop complex sensory organs, and occupy ecological niches previously unavailable. It was a leap from a simple tool to an entire toolbox. The earliest forms of multicellularity probably resembled modern colonial algae, like volvox, where hundreds or thousands of cells live together, some specializing in reproduction, others in movement. Then came the very first, primitive animals, perhaps resembling early sponges. Sponges are still relatively simple multicellular organisms today, with cells that show some specialization, but can also revert to other functions. They demonstrate a basic level of cellular cooperation. This slow progression from simple cells to early multicellular forms unfolded over a vast period in Earth's history, spanning hundreds of millions of years, leading up to around 600 million years ago. We find tantalizing fossil evidence of this transition in what's known as the Ediacaran biota, enigmatic, soft-bodied multicellular organisms that appeared before the Cambrian explosion. These strange creatures, found as imprints in ancient rocks, don't always fit neatly into modern animal categories. They often resemble quilted mats, fronds, or discs, some sessile, fixed in place, others slowly gliding across the seafloor. They were pioneers of multicellular life, testing out various body plans in a world largely free of predators. Their existence highlights the fact that multicellularity, like eukaryotic cells, was another incredibly long, drawn-out evolutionary experiment, a slow dance towards greater complexity. And then, approximately 541 million years ago, after nearly 4 billion years of microbial dominance, and then a long, quiet prelude of early, soft-bodied multicellular forms, something truly astonishing happened. It was a period of unprecedented biological innovation, a burst of diversification so remarkable that it's known as the Cambrian explosion. Despite its dramatic name, the Cambrian explosion wasn't an instantaneous event. It wasn't like life suddenly appeared overnight in its modern forms. Rather, it was a relatively rapid, on a geological timescale, lasting perhaps 20-25 million years. Suddenly, in the Cambrian layers of rock, we find an incredible array of creatures with distinct heads and tails, segmented bodies, complex limbs, and crucially, hard parts, shells, exoskeletons, teeth, and claws. This was a game changer. Hard parts could be fossilized much more easily, which is why the Cambrian is so well represented in the fossil record compared to earlier periods. It's like the light suddenly came on in a previously dark theater. What ignited this explosion of life? Scientists propose several interconnected factors, a convergence of conditions that created the perfect storm for rapid diversification. Firstly, environmental changes. The Great Oxidation Event, initiated by cyanobacteria billions of years prior, had finally reached a tipping point. Oxygen levels in the oceans and atmosphere had risen to critical levels, allowing for more energetic metabolisms. Complex, active, and larger animals need a lot of energy, and oxygen is the key fuel for efficient energy production. There were also likely fluctuations in global temperatures, sea levels, and nutrient availability, creating dynamic environments that favored adaptation and diversification. Secondly, the evolution of complex genes. While the Ediacaran biota were experimenting with early multicellularity, the genetic toolkit, the set of genes that control body plan development, was slowly evolving in their single-celled and early multicellular ancestors. Genes like the Hox genes, which dictate the basic layout of an animal's body from head to tail, were present in rudimentary forms long before the Cambrian. During the Cambrian, these genes and their regulatory networks likely became more sophisticated, allowing for greater modularity and flexibility in body design. Think of it like a set of Lego bricks. Before the Cambrian, life had perhaps a few basic bricks. During the Cambrian, a whole new factory of specialized bricks and sophisticated instruction manuals came online, allowing for an incredible array of complex constructions. Thirdly, and perhaps most dramatically, was the onset of an evolutionary arms race. With the appearance of hard parts and improved locomotion, a new dynamic emerged: predation. Before the Cambrian, life was likely dominated by grazers and filter feeders, but with the advent of teeth, jaws, and sharp claws, animals could now actively hunt and consume other animals. This introduced a powerful new selective pressure. If you were a tasty, soft-bodied creature, you either needed to evolve defenses, hard shells, spines, burrowing behaviors, or you quickly became lunch. And if you were a predator, you needed to evolve better ways to catch prey, faster movement, sharper senses, stronger jaws. This escalating cycle of predator and prey, each driving the other to evolve better offensive and defensive strategies, acted as a powerful engine of diversification, accelerating the slow dance into a furious tempo for a period. Consider some of the stars of the Cambrian stage. Trilobites, these iconic arthropods, with their segmented bodies and distinctive three-lobed appearance, were incredibly diverse and abundant. They were among the first creatures to develop hard exoskeletons, which offered protection and a framework for muscle attachment, enabling more powerful movement. Anomalocaris, a fearsome predator of its time, reaching up to 1 meter in length, with large compound eyes, formidable grasping appendages, and a circular mouth. It was an apex predator. a clear sign of the new predatory ecology, Pikaia. Though initially less impressive in appearance than its armored contemporaries, this worm-like creature is hugely significant. It possessed a primitive notochord, a flexible rod that supported its body, placing it as one of the earliest known chordates, a group that includes all vertebrates, and thus ultimately us. Its humble form belied its immense evolutionary importance. The Cambrian explosion wasn't an isolated event, nor did it exhaust life's capacity for innovation. It laid the groundwork. It established the fundamental animal body plans. But the diversification continued and spread throughout the oceans after the Cambrian period. New groups of organisms continued to evolve, filling ever more specific ecological niches. Fish, for instance, rapidly diversified during the Devonian period, often called the Age of Fish. They evolved from primitive jawless forms into a dizzying array of jawed fish, including the ancestors of all modern bony fish and cartilaginous fish like sharks. The evolution of jaws was another monumental innovation, allowing for more efficient feeding and unlocking new predatory and herbivorous strategies. Within the fish, a particularly important lineage arose, the lobe-finned fish. Unlike ray-finned fish, whose fins are supported by bony rays, lobe-finned fish possessed fleshy, muscular fins supported by bones and muscles resembling primitive limbs. These were the fish that were poised for the next great leap, the next grand migration in the slow dance of evolution. Their world was still entirely aquatic, but the continents were moving, climates were changing, and new opportunities were emerging at the very edges of the water. This era, from the Cambrian to the end of the Devonian, solidified life's dominance in the oceans. From the first single-celled organisms through the incredible leap to eukaryotic complexity, then the cautious steps towards multicellularity, and finally the explosive diversification of the Cambrian and beyond. The oceans had become a vibrant, complex tapestry of life. Every conceivable aquatic niche was being explored, from filter feeders clinging to the seafloor to powerful predators patrolling the open waters. The blueprint for animal life had been established, refined and diversified, but there was still an entire vast and challenging realm that remained largely unconquered, the land. The continents, though ancient, were still relatively barren landscapes for much of this period, save for some pioneering microbial mats and perhaps early simple plants. The air was breathable thanks to the millennia of work by cyanobacteria, but the transition from water to land presented an entirely new set of obstacles: gravity, desiccation, drying out, temperature fluctuations, and the need for new ways to move, breathe, and reproduce outside of an aquatic environment. Yet, the slow, persistent dance of evolution had prepared the players. The lobe-finned fish carried within their genetic code the very structures that, with further modification over millions of years, would enable their descendants to defy gravity and breathe the air. The green algae in the shallow waters held the key to terrestrial plant life. The stage was set, once again, for an unprecedented migration, a grand venturing forth from the comfort of the water onto the harsh but incredibly promising new frontier of the land. The next chapter in this billion-year saga will see life take its first tentative, then confident, steps out of the primordial soup and into an entirely new dimension of existence. We stand now at a precipice in life's grand story, gazing out from the teeming ancient oceans towards a vast, desolate, yet profoundly promising new frontier, the land. Our last chapter ended with the oceans vibrant and complex, a swirling tapestry of diversified life, from the humble, pioneering single cells that had transformed the atmosphere to the intricate body plans forged in the Cambrian explosion, and the burgeoning array of fish, including those crucial lobe-fin varieties, whose sturdy, bone-fleshed fins hinted at a future beyond the waves. For billions of years, water had been life's cradle, its sanctuary, its entire world. But evolution, the relentless force of change operating over deep time, was about to choreograph its next monumental act, the colonization of the continents. This transition from water to land was not a single dramatic leap, but a truly arduous, incremental series of adaptations, a testament to the patient, persistent nature of the slow dance. The terrestrial environment presented an utterly alien set of challenges for any organism accustomed to the buoyancy, stability, and constant hydration of water. Imagine leaving your entire familiar world behind to enter one where everything is fundamentally different. What were these immense challenges that life had to overcome? Firstly, gravity. In water, buoyancy supports an organism's weight. On land, life suddenly had to contend with the relentless downward pull of gravity. This necessitated the evolution of strong internal skeletons or rigid external structures to provide support and allow for movement. Secondly, desiccation or drying out. Water is everywhere in the ocean. On land, the air is often dry, and cells are constantly at risk of losing their precious internal moisture. Life needed new ways to retain water, from waterproof coverings to internal organs for hydration. Thirdly, respiration. Gills, perfectly efficient for extracting dissolved oxygen from water, are useless in air. New respiratory systems were needed to absorb gaseous oxygen from the atmosphere. Fourthly, reproduction. Aquatic organisms could simply release their eggs and sperm into the water, relying on the currents for fertilization. On land, delicate gametes would dry out, and embryos would be vulnerable. New strategies for internal fertilization and protected embryonic development were essential. Fifthly, temperature fluctuations. Water has a high heat capacity, meaning its temperature changes slowly. Land temperatures can fluctuate wildly between day and night, summer and winter. Organisms needed mechanisms for thermoregulation. And finally, resource acquisition and dispersal. How do you find food, and how do you spread your offspring when you can't simply drift or swim through a uniform medium? New sensory organs, locomotive strategies, and dispersal methods were required. It was against this formidable backdrop that life began its grand terrestrial experiment, and it wasn't animals that led the charge. The very first pioneers of the land were the plants. Their slow, steady conquest of the continents, beginning around 500 million years ago, fundamentally altered the terrestrial environment, making it habitable for others. Imagine the early continents, vast, barren expanses of rock and dust, sculpted by wind and rain, but utterly lifeless, save for perhaps some microbial mats clinging to moist surfaces. Then the first brave photosynthetic organisms, likely green algae living in shallow coastal waters, began to push the boundaries. They faced the immediate problem of drying out. The initial adaptations were simple, developing a waxy cuticle, a waterproof outer layer, to reduce water loss, but this also meant they couldn't absorb water directly from the air, necessitating the evolution of roots to anchor them and draw water and nutrients from the nascent soil. As they grew taller, competing for sunlight, they needed structural support, leading to the development of rigid cell walls and internal vascular tissue, a plumbing system of tubes, xylem and phloem, to transport water and nutrients against gravity, from roots to leaves. This was a crucial innovation, allowing plants to grow large and complex, standing tall against the forces of gravity and desiccation. Early land plants, like mosses and liverworts, still depended on water for reproduction, releasing swimming sperm that needed a film of water to reach the eggs. But over deep time, evolution perfected new reproductive strategies. The invention of spores, tiny reproductive cells encased in protective walls that could be dispersed by wind, allowed plants to spread far and wide without constant water. Even more revolutionary was the evolution of seeds. A seed is essentially a tiny embryonic plant, packaged with its own food supply inside a protective coat, capable of surviving dry conditions for extended periods and waiting for favorable conditions to germinate. The seed freed plants from the immediate need for water for reproduction, truly cementing their dominance on land. This led to the rise of seed plants, including conifers and eventually flowering plants, which diversified exponentially, covering the continents in lush forests and grasslands. The impact of plants on the terrestrial environment was immense. They transformed barren rock into rich soil, stabilizing landscapes and preventing erosion. Their roots broke up rocks, releasing minerals, Their photosynthetic activity continued to pump vast amounts of oxygen into the atmosphere, creating the very air we breathe. Forests created shade and humidity, moderating temperatures and providing new microclimates, the very foundations of terrestrial ecosystems. The primary producers at the base of the food web were laid down by these pioneering green organisms. Without plants, the land would have remained largely uninhabitable for complex animal life. They created the very niche that animals would later fill. And so, with the continents slowly greening, the stage was set for the animals. The first animal colonizers were likely arthropods, insects, spiders, and their relatives. They already possessed external exoskeletons, which offered some protection against desiccation and gravity, and their small size made the challenges less extreme. Insects diversified rapidly, evolving specialized respiratory systems, tracheae, and reproductive strategies for land. But the journey of vertebrates, our own lineage, was a more dramatic tale. Remember those lobe-finned fish from our last chapter? These were the key players. Their muscular, bony fins, originally used for maneuvering in shallow, oxygen-poor water, or perhaps for pushing through dense aquatic vegetation, began to be repurposed. Imagine a period where seasonal droughts were common and shallow pools would dry up. Fish in these pools might have faced a choice: perish or try to flop their way to a deeper pool. Those with slightly stronger, more articulated fins would have had a survival advantage. Over millions of years, the bones and muscles in these fins gradually strengthened and differentiated, slowly becoming rudimentary limbs. Simultaneously, primitive lungs, which had perhaps evolved in some fish as a supplemental gulp of air in oxygen-depleted waters, became increasingly vital for respiration on land. This slow, arduous transformation, traced through an incredible fossil record, led to the first tetrapods, four-limbed vertebrates. Early tetrapods, like Tiktaalik, a famous fishapod fossil, represent critical transitional forms, possessing both fish-like features, scales, fins, gills, and tetrapod-like features, a flat skull, eyes on top of the head, and robust ribs suggesting the ability to support its body on land, and limb-like bones in its fins. The discovery of such fossils provides powerful, tangible evidence of evolution in action, showcasing the gradual modification of existing structures for new functions. The first full-fledged land vertebrates were the amphibians. These early amphibians, emerging around 370 million years ago, represented a monumental evolutionary achievement. They could move on land, breathe air, and seek out new food sources. However, they remained tied to water for reproduction, laying jelly-like eggs that needed moisture to survive, and their larvae, tadpoles, still underwent an aquatic stage. Their skin also typically required moisture. Amphibians were the true pioneers, but they were not fully independent of their aquatic heritage. They were in a transitional phase, literally and figuratively, half in one world, half in another. The complete conquest of land, the true liberation from water, came with the evolution of the reptiles. This was another profound innovation, particularly the development of the amniotic egg. Unlike amphibian eggs, the amniotic egg has a series of protective membranes and a shell that enclosed the embryo in its own private, self-contained aquatic environment. This meant that reptiles could lay their eggs on dry land, freeing them from the need to return to water for reproduction. Coupled with scaly, waterproof skin to prevent desiccation and more efficient lungs, reptiles became the first truly terrestrial vertebrates, able to live their entire lives far from bodies of water. This opened up vast new territories and ecological niches, leading to a massive diversification of reptilian forms, including the dinosaurs, which would dominate the planet for hundreds of millions of years. The journey to land, for both plants and animals, vividly illustrates the engines of change that drive evolution. These are the fundamental mechanisms that, when operating over deep time, sculpt life into its myriad forms. Let's delve deeper into these crucial forces. The primary engine, the one most often associated with evolution, is natural selection. This is not a conscious choice or a guiding hand. It's a blind, mechanistic process driven by three core conditions: variation, Within any population of organisms, individuals are not identical. There are differences in their traits, size, color, speed, disease resistance, metabolism, etc. This variation arises primarily from random mutations in DNA, which are the ultimate source of all new genetic material. Inheritance. Many of these variations are heritable, meaning they can be passed down from parents to offspring. This is where genetics comes in, ensuring that advantageous traits can be propagated through generations. Differential survival and reproduction. Here's the critical part. In any given environment, resources are finite, and organisms face challenges: predators, disease, climate fluctuations, competition. Not all individuals will survive to reproductive age, and not all who survive will reproduce equally successfully. Those individuals with traits that make them slightly better adapted to their environment. Perhaps they're faster, better camouflaged, more resistant to a specific pathogen, or more efficient at finding food, are more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass on those advantageous traits. Over generations, these advantageous traits become more common in the population, gradually shifting the characteristics of the species. Think of the colonization of land through the lens of natural selection. In those ancient lobe-finned fish populations, there would have been natural variation in the strength and articulation of their fins, and perhaps in the efficiency of their primitive lung-like structures. When faced with drying ponds or new food sources on the shore, those individuals with slightly stronger fins for flopping or slightly more efficient breathing capabilities would have had a survival edge. They would have been the adapters, more likely to reach the next pond, find food, or avoid predation, and thus more likely to reproduce. Their offspring would inherit these slightly advantageous traits, and over vast generations, the average characteristics of the population would shift, leading ultimately to the evolution of limbs and lungs. This is directional selection, where selection favors one extreme of a trait, driving the population in a specific direction. Natural selection isn't just about survival of the fittest in a brute force sense. It's about fitness in a biological context, which means reproductive success. An organism is fit if it successfully passes on its genes to the next generation. A perfectly adapted organism that produces no offspring is evolutionarily a dead end. Conversely, a seemingly weaker organism that manages to have many fertile offspring is by evolutionary definition highly fit. Beyond natural selection, other engines of change are constantly at work. Mutation, as mentioned, is the raw material of evolution. These are random changes in the DNA sequence. Mutations can be as simple as a single typo in the genetic code, or as large as entire sections of chromosomes being duplicated or rearranged. Most mutations are neutral, having no effect on an organism's survival or reproduction. Some are harmful, leading to genetic disorders or developmental problems, but occasionally, purely by chance, a mutation can be beneficial, providing a new trait that offers an advantage in a particular environment. It's like a random spelling error in a cookbook that by pure serendipity makes a dish taste better. Without mutations, there would be no new variation, and evolution would grind to a halt. The genetic novelty that allowed for the development of roots in plants, or the formation of an amniotic egg in reptiles, ultimately originated from random mutations that, once they appeared, were then acted upon by natural selection. Another powerful force is genetic drift. Unlike natural selection, which is directional, favoring specific traits, genetic drift is entirely random. It's the change in the frequency of genes in a population due to chance events, especially significant in small populations. Imagine a small pond with a unique species of frog, where some frogs are green and some are brown. If a large random flood sweeps through the pond, and by chance, more green frogs are washed away than brown ones, the gene for green color will become less common in the surviving population, purely by accident, not because brown was inherently fitter. Two common scenarios for genetic drift are the bottleneck effect, where a population undergoes a drastic reduction in size, e.g., due to a natural disaster, leaving only a small random sample of the original genetic diversity, and the founder effect, where a small group of individuals colonizes a new area and their gene pool is only a random subset of the original population. Genetic drift can lead to populations becoming very different from their ancestors or from other populations of the same species, simply through the vagaries of chance. Gene flow, also known as migration, is another engine of change. This refers to the transfer of genetic material from one population to another. When individuals from one population move and interbreed with individuals from another, they introduce new genes into the recipient population's gene pool. This can increase genetic variation within a population, or it can make different populations more similar to each other, counteracting the effects of genetic drift or local selection pressures. For organisms colonizing new land masses, gene flow between the pioneering populations and their source populations back in the water, or between different patches of terrestrial colonizers, would have played a role in distributing new adaptations and maintaining some level of genetic connectivity. All these mechanisms, natural selection, mutation, genetic drift, and gene flow, interact in complex ways, constantly shaping populations over deep time. And the result of these interactions is adaptation. An adaptation is a trait that has evolved through natural selection to enhance an organism's survival and reproduction in a specific environment. The waxy cuticle of a plant, the strong limbs of a tetrapod, the amniotic egg of a reptile, these are all exquisite adaptations to the challenges of terrestrial life. It's important to understand that adaptations are rarely, if ever, perfect. Evolution doesn't design from scratch. It tinkers with what's already there. It's constrained by historical baggage and trade-offs. For example, the same bones that make up the human hand are homologous, share a common evolutionary origin with the bones in a whale's flipper, a bat's wing, or a bird's wing. Evolution didn't invent a new limb for each, it modified an existing one. This means that sometimes adaptations are compromises. A bird's wing is fantastic for flight, but it's not great for swimming or digging. There's a trade-off. This explains why we see such diversity, and sometimes what appear to be suboptimal designs in nature. They are products of historical contingency and environmental compromises, shaped by the slow dance of what was available and what was advantageous at the time. The colonization of land wasn't just about individual organisms adapting. It was about the co-evolution of entire ecosystems. As plants covered the land, they created new habitats and new food sources. This led to the co-evolution of plant-eating animals and then predators that ate those plant eaters. The intricate web of life we see on land today, from pollinating insects and flowering plants to predator-prey relationships, is the result of millions of years of co-evolutionary arms races and partnerships. Imagine a plant evolving a defensive toxin to deter herbivores, then the herbivores evolving resistance to that toxin, then the plant evolving a new toxin, a continuous escalating dance of adaptation, or a flower evolving a particular shape to attract a specific pollinator, and the pollinator evolving a specialized mouthpart to access that flower's nectar, a mutually beneficial dance. The transition to land didn't just change life, it fundamentally changed the planet itself. The deep roots of plants altered weathering patterns, accelerating the breakdown of rocks and impacting atmospheric CO2 levels. The decay of vast amounts of plant matter led to the formation of coal deposits, locking away carbon and further altering atmospheric chemistry. Animal activity, from burrowing to grazing, also reshaped terrestrial landscapes. This continuous feedback loop between life and its environment is a hallmark of the slow dance of evolution on a planetary scale. So from the first hesitant steps of algae onto moist shorelines, to the development of complex vascular systems and seeds, and from the fin to limb transformation of lobe-finned fish to the amniotic egg of reptiles, the terrestrial realm became a vibrant, dynamic arena for evolutionary innovation. This was a period of immense diversification, not just in terms of new species, but in entirely new forms of life and new ecological roles. The Earth was no longer just a water planet. It was a dual world, with immense ecosystems thriving both in the oceans and across the evergreening continents. And within this burgeoning terrestrial life, new lineages would arise, adapting to new challenges, filling new niches. The reptiles, having mastered the land, would give rise to astonishing new forms, including the formidable dinosaurs. But even as these giants roamed the earth, a small, unassuming group of their distant relatives, the early mammals, were quietly perfecting their own survival strategies, waiting for their moment in the evolutionary spotlight. And far above them, another lineage would take to the skies, transforming the very concept of terrestrial movement. The dance continues, always finding new steps, new partners, new rhythms, driven by the relentless, patient engines of change operating across the vastness of deep time. The stage is still immense, and the next movements will see life soar and diversify in ways that were once utterly unimaginable. The Permian period, which concluded roughly 252 million years ago, ended in catastrophe. It was the most severe mass extinction event in Earth's history, often grimly dubbed the Great Dying. An estimated 90% of all marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species vanished. This wasn't a sudden single impact, but a prolonged period of devastating environmental changes, likely triggered by massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia, which released enormous quantities of greenhouse gases, leading to rapid global warming, ocean acidification, and widespread anoxia, lack of oxygen in the seas. This apocalyptic event reset the evolutionary clock, wiping out many dominant lineages, including the large mammal-like reptiles that had thrived in the late Paleozoic. But like all mass extinctions, while devastating, it also cleared the slate, opening up vast ecological niches for the survivors to exploit. And among those survivors, in the ensuing Triassic period, a new lineage began its ascent, the dinosaurs. The Mesozoic era, lasting from about 25.2 to 66 million years ago, is rightly known as the Age of Reptiles, and specifically the Age of Dinosaurs. These magnificent creatures, descendants of earlier reptile groups, rose from relative obscurity to become the dominant terrestrial vertebrates across the globe. Their success was not accidental. It was the result of a suite of remarkable evolutionary adaptations that allowed them to thrive in a wide range of environments. They possessed efficient respiratory systems, capable of sustained activity. Their posture evolved to be more upright, with limbs positioned directly beneath their bodies, allowing for more efficient locomotion compared to the sprawling gait of earlier reptiles. Their scales and tough skin provided excellent protection against desiccation, and of course they laid amniotic eggs, freeing them from aquatic nurseries. Our last chapter concluded with life having heroically conquered the land, a monumental achievement forged by the patient, persistent forces of evolution over vast stretches of deep time. Plants had greened the continents, creating the very foundation for terrestrial ecosystems, while amphibians took the first clumsy steps out of the water, and then reptiles, liberated by the amniotic egg, finally broke free of aquatic dependency, paving the way for a grand new era. Now, as the curtains rise on this next act of the slow dance, we witness life not just surviving on land, but utterly dominating it, transforming it, and ultimately taking to the very skies above. This is the story of out of the water, into the air, life's grand migrations, focusing on the spectacular diversification that filled the terrestrial world, culminating in the ultimate triumph of flight, a migration that pushed the boundaries of what life could achieve. While dinosaurs ruled the land, the oceans remained vibrant with marine reptiles like ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, and the skies were claimed by another group of reptiles, the pterosaurs. These were not dinosaurs, but close cousins, evolving flight independently. Pterosaurs were the first vertebrates to achieve powered flight, soaring through the Mesozoic skies on wings of stretched membrane, supported by an incredibly elongated fourth finger. They ranged in size from sparrow-sized forms to Quetzalcoatlus, with a wingspan of over 10 meters, the largest known flying creature of all time. Their adaptation to flight was revolutionary, with hollow bones, fused vertebrae for rigidity, and a keel on their breastbone for flight muscle attachment, parallel evolutionary solutions to the challenges of flight that would later be independently developed by birds. Over millions of years, dinosaurs diversified into an astonishing array of forms, filling almost every conceivable terrestrial niche. We often picture them as lumbering giants, but their diversity was far greater. The sauropods, like Brachiosaurus and Diplodocus, were the true titans, Colossal herbivores with long necks and tails, weighing tens of tons, browse on the lush vegetation of the Mesozoic. Their sheer size was a defense against predators and likely allowed them to process enormous amounts of plant matter. Alongside them were the ornithischians, a diverse group of herbivorous dinosaurs with bird-like hips, including the armored ankylosaurs, the plate-backed stegosaurs, the horned ceratopsians, like Triceratops, and the duck-billed hadrosaurs. Each group developed unique adaptations for defense and feeding, from powerful chewing batteries to elaborate display structures. And then there were the theropods, the bipedal, often carnivorous dinosaurs that were the apex predators of their time. From the swift, agile raptors to the monstrous Tyrannosaurus rex, these creatures embodied power and ferocity. Their keen senses, powerful jaws, and sharp claws made them incredibly efficient hunters. This intricate dance between herbivore and predator, constantly refining defensive and offensive strategies, drove further diversification. The long, slow evolutionary arms race continued, pushing species to new levels of adaptation. But amid the reign of the giants, something seemingly insignificant was also evolving in the shadows: the mammals. Our earliest mammalian ancestors were tiny, shrew-like creatures that scurried beneath the feet of the dinosaurs. They had diverged from the main reptilian lineage much earlier, during the late Triassic period, alongside the early dinosaurs. For over 150 million years, throughout the entire Mesozoic era, mammals remained small, mostly nocturnal, and largely insectivorous or omnivorous. They certainly weren't the dominant life forms, yet even in their obscurity, they were quietly perfecting a set of key evolutionary innovations that would eventually enable their spectacular rise. What made these early mammals so special, allowing them to survive and ultimately thrive? Firstly, endothermy, or warm-bloodedness. Unlike reptiles whose body temperature fluctuates with the environment, mammals evolved the ability to generate and regulate their own internal body heat. This allowed them to remain active in cooler temperatures, at night, and in more varied climates than their cold-blooded counterparts. It was an energetically expensive strategy, but it offered a massive advantage in exploiting niches unavailable to most reptiles. Secondly, hair or fur, which provided insulation, crucial for maintaining that internal body temperature. Thirdly, mammary glands, allowing mothers to nourish their young with milk, providing a complete, easily digestible food source. This parental care meant offspring could be born at an earlier, more vulnerable stage, allowing for larger brains to develop after birth. Fourthly, heterodonty, meaning specialized teeth, incisors for biting, canines for tearing, molars for grinding, optimized for different diets, allowing for more efficient food processing. And finally, a larger, more complex brain, particularly the neocortex, which allowed for more sophisticated behaviors, learning, and sensory processing. These adaptations, honed over millions of years while dinosaurs held sway, were like hidden superpowers, waiting for their moment to truly shine. The Mesozoic era was a slow, complex dance of diverse terrestrial life, with dinosaurs dominating the largest ecological roles, pterosaurs ruling the skies, and humble mammals quietly adapting and surviving. But like the Permian before it, the Mesozoic would eventually come to a dramatic close with another global catastrophe. Approximately 66 million years ago, at the boundary between the Cretaceous and Paleogene periods, known as the KPG extinction event, or sometimes the KT extinction, the Earth experienced another, albeit different, cataclysm. The prevailing scientific theory, supported by overwhelming evidence, points to a massive asteroid or comet, estimated to be about 10 to 15 kilometers, 6 to 9 miles in diameter, slamming into the Yucatan Peninsula in what is now Mexico. The immediate impact would have caused immense devastation, tsunamis, wildfires, and a superheated blast wave. But the long-term effects were even more profound. The impact hurled colossal amounts of dust, soot, and aerosols into the atmosphere, blocking out the sun, plunging the Earth into a prolonged period of darkness and global winter. Photosynthesis largely shut down, leading to the collapse of food webs. Acid rain poured from the skies. This was the end of the dinosaurs, except for one crucial lineage, The non-avian dinosaurs, those majestic giants, perished. Their reign, which had lasted for 155 million years, came to an abrupt and violent end. And so we turn our attention more deeply to the grand migration into the air, a feat independently achieved by multiple lineages, demonstrating the power of convergent evolution, where different species evolve similar solutions to similar environmental challenges. This mass extinction event, while catastrophic, was another pivotal moment in the slow dance of evolution. It was a cosmic reset button, clearing the stage for new forms of life to diversify and dominate. The smaller, often nocturnal mammals, with their warm-bloodedness and generalist diets, were better equipped to survive the prolonged darkness and cold. Many smaller organisms, including insects and burrowing animals, also fared better, and crucially, a particular lineage of feathered dinosaurs, which had evolved into birds, also survived, having already mastered the air. The very first masters of the sky, long before vertebrates, were the insects. Their wings, an innovation unique among invertebrates, appeared around 400 million years ago, making them the first creatures to fly. Their early ability to escape predators, disperse rapidly, and access new food sources in 3 dimensions gave them an immense evolutionary advantage. Insect wings are not modified limbs, but entirely new outgrowths of the body wall, a testament to evolution's capacity for novelties. Their flight mechanisms diversified into countless forms, from the delicate, fluttering wings of butterflies to the powerful, buzzing wings of bees and the agile maneuvers of dragonflies. Insects continue to dominate the aerial realm in terms of sheer numbers and diversity, a testament to the enduring success of this early migration. The most spectacular and enduring success story of vertebrate flight, however, belongs to the birds. Birds are not just related to dinosaurs, they are dinosaurs, the direct descendants of a lineage of small, feathered theropod dinosaurs. The story of bird evolution is one of the most compelling narratives in paleontology, thanks to a rich fossil record that clearly shows the gradual transition. Key transitional fossils like Archaeopteryx, discovered in the late 19th century, were revelatory. Archaeopteryx had feathers and wings like a bird, but also teeth, a long bony tail, and claws on its wings, all reptilian features. It was a perfect mosaic, a tangible piece of evidence for the evolutionary link. Then came the vertebrates, with the pterosaurs making their dramatic entrance in the Triassic, as we discussed. Their flight was powerful and effective, relying on a membrane stretched between their elongated fourth finger and their body. They soared and glided, hunted and fed for over 150 million years before largely disappearing in the wake of the KPG extinction, leaving the skies open for other aerial masters. The evolution of feathers is particularly fascinating. Initially, feathers probably did not evolve for flight. Early feathered dinosaurs likely used them for insulation, helping them maintain their body temperature, similar to mammalian hair. They might also have been used for display, attracting mates or intimidating rivals, much like a peacock's tail. Only later, perhaps as feathers became longer and more complex, did they begin to be co-opted for aerodynamic purposes, allowing small, tree-dwelling dinosaurs to glide, then leap, and eventually achieve powered flight. This is a classic example of exaptation, where a trait that evolved for one purpose is later co-opted for a different, often more significant function. The adaptation of birds for flight involved a complete overhaul of their anatomy. Their bones became remarkably lightweight and hollow, yet strong, often reinforced with internal struts. Many bones in their spine and pelvis fused, creating a rigid framework for flight muscles. Their sternum, breastbone, developed a prominent keel, providing a large surface area for the attachment of the powerful flight muscles that move the wings. Their respiratory system is incredibly efficient, a unique unidirectional airflow through their lungs and air sacs, allowing them to extract oxygen far more effectively than mammals. All these intricate adaptations, refined over tens of millions of years, represent an incredible journey in the slow dance of evolution, transforming a land-dwelling dinosaur into a creature capable of soaring through the vastness of the sky. And just to show that evolution is never short on innovative solutions, flight also evolved a third time in vertebrates, In the bats, these are the only mammals capable of sustained, powered flight. Bat wings are highly modified forelimbs with greatly elongated fingers that support a membrane of skin. This is a classic example of convergent evolution, where bats, birds, and pterosaurs, starting from different reptilian or mammalian ancestors, all evolved the complex trait of flight using different anatomical structures, yet arriving at similar functional outcomes. It highlights the power of natural selection to find effective solutions to similar environmental pressures, irrespective of the starting point. The impact of these grand migrations, from water to land and then into the air, has been profound. Each transition opened up vast new territories and ecological niches, leading to bursts of diversification that reshaped the planet's biodiversity. The land provided new types of food, new challenges, and new opportunities for competition and cooperation. The air offered an unparalleled advantage for dispersal, escape from predators, and access to new food sources like airborne insects or high-growing fruits. These successive waves of migration and diversification didn't just add new species, they fundamentally altered the flow of energy and the structure of ecosystems across the globe. The breaking up of the supercontinent Pangaea, which began in the Mesozoic, also played a crucial role in these grand migrations and subsequent diversifications. As continents drifted apart, they carried populations with them, isolating them and driving further unique evolutionary paths. This geographical separation, over millions of years, contributed immensely to the unique biodiversity we see on different continents today. The Earth's geology and life's evolution are inextricably linked, each shaping the other in a continuous, billion-year feedback loop. Throughout this monumental chapter, we've witnessed the engines of change, mutation creating new variations, natural selection favoring the advantageous ones, genetic drift shaping isolated populations, and gene flow mixing gene pools, relentlessly at work. These mechanisms, operating over the immense stretches of deep time, converted lobe fins into limbs, scales into feathers, and the humble beginnings of early mammals into the diverse forms that would soon dominate the Cenozoic era. The rise and fall of dominant groups like the dinosaurs underscore the dynamic and often unpredictable nature of the slow dance. Mass extinctions, though devastating, are not just endings, they are also profound beginnings, clearing the way for new evolutionary experiments and new forms of life to flourish. We now stand at the threshold of the Cenozoic era, the era we currently inhabit, the age of mammals and birds. The great dinosaurs are gone, leaving behind a vastly different world. The survivors of the KPG extinction, particularly the small, adaptable mammals and the resilient birds, found themselves with an open playing field, a planet teeming with new opportunities. Their slow, patient accumulation of traits that allowed them to survive the catastrophe now propelled them to global dominance. The stage is set for an explosion of mammalian and avian forms, a story that will ultimately lead us to ourselves, to the peculiar lineage of primates that gave rise to humanity. The dance has evolved, and its rhythm is about to pick up speed, leading to the complex, self-aware life that now ponders its own origins in the vastness of cosmic time. We arrive now at the culmination of our epic journey, a journey that began in the ineffable abyss of deep time, witnessing the birth of a fiery planet, the spark of life in a primordial soup, the slow 2 billion-year reign of the single cell, the mind-bending leaps to eukaryotic complexity and multicellularity, the explosion of animal forms in the Cambrian, and the daring conquests of land and air. We have traced a continuous, unbroken thread of life, patiently adapting, diversifying, and innovating over billions of years. And in this final chapter, we bring the story home, to our place in the dance, the story of humanity's evolution and the future of life. The asteroid impact that ended the Mesozoic era, roughly 66 million years ago, was a cataclysm of unparalleled devastation for the non-avian dinosaurs and countless other life forms. But as we discussed, for the small, unassuming mammals, it was a profound opportunity. With the ecological giants removed from the stage, a vast array of empty niches suddenly became available. It was as if a massive global reset button had been pressed, and the survivors, primarily the warm-blooded, adaptable mammals and the already aerial birds, were perfectly positioned to inherit the Earth. This ushered in the Cenozoic era, the era we live in now, aptly nicknamed the Age of Mammals and Birds. The diversification of mammals in the early Cenozoic was nothing short of spectacular. From their small, shrew-like ancestors, they rapidly evolved into a dizzying array of forms, exploring almost every conceivable ecological role. Some became enormous herbivores, like the ancestors of modern elephants and rhinos, browse on the newly lush plant life. Others developed into powerful predators, giving rise to the carnivores we know today: cats, dogs, bears. Mammals diversified into aquatic environments, evolving into whales, dolphins, and seals, showing how powerful evolutionary pressures can repurpose terrestrial limbs back into fins and flippers, and how an entirely new respiratory system, capable of deep dives, could evolve. Others took to the skies, leading to the evolution of bats, the only flying mammals, a testament to convergent evolution alongside birds and extinct pterosaurs. The range of mammalian adaptations in this period was truly astonishing, from specialized teeth for grinding tough plants, to the complex social structures of herd animals, from the powerful musculature of large predators to the intricate sensory systems of nocturnal hunters. Alongside the mammals, birds also underwent an explosive diversification, liberated from the shadow of the pterosaurs and the non-avian dinosaurs. They quickly filled aerial niches across the globe, from the smallest hummingbirds to the largest eagles, from flightless ostriches to penguins, perfectly adapted for marine life. Birds demonstrate an incredible range of adaptations, all built upon the foundational blueprint of their feathered dinosaur ancestors. Their specialized beaks, hollow bones, and unique respiratory systems allowed them to adapt to an unparalleled variety of diets and environments, cementing their place as the most successful vertebrate group in the air. As the Cenozoic progressed, the continents continued their slow, majestic drift, reshaping oceans, creating new mountain ranges, and altering global climate patterns. This geological dynamism continued to drive evolution, isolating populations, creating new selective pressures, and encouraging further diversification. Amidst this backdrop of change and diversification, one particular lineage of mammals began its own, perhaps most intriguing dance: the primates. The earliest primates were small, tree-dwelling creatures, likely resembling modern tree shrews or lemurs, that emerged in the Paleocene epoch. Shortly after the dinosaur extinction, their arboreal or tree-dwelling lifestyle drove a unique suite of evolutionary adaptations that would prove crucial for our own lineage. These adaptations include, firstly, grasping hands and feet with opposable thumbs / big toes. This allowed for powerful grip on branches, precise manipulation of objects, and later, the development of tool use. Imagine a squirrel's claws versus a monkey's hand. The difference in dexterity is profound. Secondly, stereoscopic vision. Their eyes shifted from the sides of the head to the front, providing overlapping fields of view and depth perception. This was essential for accurately judging distances when leaping between branches, but it also laid the groundwork for complex visual processing that would become vital for navigating a complex world and interacting with tools. Thirdly, larger brains relative to body size. While not immediately the most massive brains, early primates began to show a trend towards increased brain size and complexity, particularly in areas associated with vision, coordination, and complex behavior. This was likely driven by the cognitive demands of navigating a three-dimensional arboreal environment and the social complexities of group living. Fourthly, reduced reliance on smell and an increased reliance on vision. While other mammals often had keen noses, primates began to shift their primary sense to sight, an adaptation directly tied to their visual, grasping arboreal existence. Fifthly, prolonged parental care and delayed maturation. Primate offspring tend to be born relatively helpless and require a long period of parental care and learning, While seemingly a disadvantage, this extended childhood allowed for greater learning, development of complex social behaviors, and the transmission of learned knowledge across generations, the beginnings of culture. Over tens of millions of years, primates diversified, spreading across continents that were still connected or more easily accessible. From these early ancestors evolved the various branches of primates we see today: the lemurs and lorises, the tarsiers, the monkeys of the Old and New Worlds, and ultimately the apes, including gorillas, chimpanzees, orangutans, and eventually our own lineage. Our story, the story of hominin evolution, begins to diverge significantly from other apes around 6 to 7 million years ago in Africa. This divergence was not a sudden split where one day an ape gave birth to a human. Far from it. It was a gradual, branching process, a slow dance of populations adapting to changing environments, with many intermediate forms and side branches that ultimately led nowhere. The exact reasons for this initial divergence are still debated, but they likely involved a combination of climate shifts that led to the expansion of savannas and woodlands, creating new ecological pressures and opportunities. The most defining and perhaps earliest significant evolutionary step in our lineage was the adoption of bipedalism, the ability to walk habitually upright on two legs. This was not an overnight transformation. Early hominins like Sahelanthropus and Orin show some evidence of bipedal features as early as 6-7 million years ago. More definitive evidence comes from species like Australopithecus afarensis, famously represented by Lucy, who lived about 3.2 million years ago. Her skeleton clearly shows adaptations for walking upright, including a bowl-shaped pelvis and angled femurs, but Lucy also retained adaptations for tree climbing, suggesting a mixed lifestyle. Why did bipedalism evolve? Several hypotheses exist. It might have freed the hands for carrying food or offspring. It could have allowed for better vigilance, seeing over tall grasses to spot predators or prey. It might have reduced exposure to direct sunlight, helping with thermoregulation in open environments. Or it could have been more energy efficient for long-distance travel across fragmented woodlands and savannas. Whatever the initial selective pressure, bipedalism profoundly reshaped our skeletal structure from our feet to our skull, setting the stage for future evolutionary changes. It was the first truly distinct step away from our ape cousins. Following bipedalism, another profound change began: the expansion of the brain. While early hominins like Australopithecus had ape-sized brains, roughly 400-500 cubic centimeters, species in the genus Homo, which emerged around 2.8 million years ago, showed a dramatic increase. Homo habilis, handyman, one of the earliest members of our genus, had a brain size of around 600 to 700 cc, and is associated with the earliest undisputed evidence of stone tool manufacture, simple choppers and flakes. This marks the beginning of the Stone Age, a period defined by the tools made by our ancestors. The relationship between brain expansion and tool use is a classic example of a positive feedback loop in evolution. More complex tools require more cognitive ability. Selecting for greater cognitive ability leads to the capacity for even more complex tools. This continuous interplay drove rapid brain evolution in subsequent Homo species. Homo erectus, emerging around 1.9 million years ago, had a brain size of 900 to 100 cc, comparable to the lower end of modern human range. Homo erectus was a remarkably successful species, not only mastering more sophisticated stone tools like hand axes, but also likely controlling fire, which offered warmth, protection, and crucial for our story, the ability to cook food. The shift to a cooked diet was another revolutionary step. Cooking breaks down tough plant fibers and makes meat easier to digest, increasing the nutritional yield from food. This meant that our ancestors could extract more energy with less digestive effort, providing crucial calories to fuel an increasingly large and energetically demanding brain. This freed up resources that would otherwise be spent on a massive gut, allowing more energy to be directed to brain development. Homo erectus was also the first hominin to migrate out of Africa, spreading across Asia and Europe, demonstrating incredible adaptability to diverse environments. This global expansion highlights the power of innovation, both technological, tools, fire, and biological, a larger brain, bipedalism, in allowing a species to break out of its geographic confines. Further brain expansion and refinement continued with species like Homo heidelbergensis around 700,000 years ago, which is thought to be the common ancestor of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis, who inhabited Europe and parts of Asia from about 400,000 to 40,000 years ago, had brains as large as, or even larger than, modern humans, adapted to cold, challenging environments, and left behind evidence of complex behaviors, including burial of their dead and care for the injured. And then there's us, Homo sapiens. Our species emerged in Africa around 300,000 years ago. While our brain size didn't necessarily increase dramatically from our immediate ancestors, its internal organization and wiring became exceptionally complex, leading to the capacity for abstract thought, symbolic language, elaborate culture, and technological innovation on an unprecedented scale. The development of complex language in particular was a game changer. It allowed for the efficient transmission of intricate knowledge, the coordination of large groups, and the creation of shared narratives and beliefs, the very essence of human culture. This cultural evolution, driven by our uniquely complex brains, began to accelerate at a rate far exceeding purely biological evolution. The story of human evolution is not a linear march from primitive to perfect, but a bushy tree with many branches, most of which eventually withered. We are the sole surviving twig of an incredibly diverse hominin family tree. Our ancestors competed with, interbred with, and sometimes outlasted other hominin species, including Neanderthals and Denisovans, as Homo sapiens embarked on multiple waves of migration out of Africa, eventually populating every continent on Earth. This global dispersal, starting perhaps 70,000, 100,000 years ago, was another grand migration, driven by curiosity, resource availability, and perhaps population pressure. It's crucial to understand that while humanity might seem unique, our traits are not entirely new inventions. Our bipedalism is a modification of a primate limb. Our large brain is an elaboration of a mammalian brain. Our social structures, while complex, have roots in the cooperative behaviors seen in many animal groups. Our evolution is not a story of divine intervention or a sudden miraculous leap, but a product of the very same slow, patient forces of natural selection, mutation, genetic drift, and gene flow that have shaped all life on Earth for billions of years. We are a part of the dance, not separate from it. However, our species, Homo sapiens, has introduced a profoundly new element into the evolutionary dance, the power of culture and technology. Unlike any other species, we are not solely reliant on biological evolution to adapt to our environment. We can consciously change our environment, invent tools, develop agriculture, create medicines, and build complex societies. This ability to shape our surroundings, to create what scientists call a niche, has allowed us to thrive in almost every corner of the planet, overcoming environmental challenges that would be insurmountable for other species. Our technological advancements have, in a very short span of deep time, given us a level of control over our planet that is unprecedented. This brings us to our place in the dance now and the future of life. While we are profoundly shaped by billions of years of biological evolution, we are also, paradoxically, becoming the dominant evolutionary force on the planet. Our activities in the last few centuries, particularly since the Industrial Revolution, have begun to alter the Earth on a geological scale, leading many scientists to propose we are now living in the Anthropocene, a new geological epoch defined by human impact. Consider the consequences of our brief but powerful tenure on Earth. Our burning of fossil fuels, the accumulated remains of ancient plants and microbes, has rapidly released vast amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, changing the global climate at a rate unprecedented in millions of years. Our agriculture has transformed vast landscapes, altering ecosystems and driving deforestation. Our industries have polluted air and water, and perhaps most critically for the slow dance, our actions are driving a sixth mass extinction event, Species are disappearing at rates thousands of times faster than the natural background extinction rate, driven by habitat loss, climate change, pollution, and overexploitation. This rapid loss of biodiversity is irreversible and impoverishes the very tapestry of life that has been woven over billions of years. We are inadvertently, or perhaps sometimes ignorantly, undoing much of the great diversification. Yet evolution continues. It is not a historical relic. It is an ongoing process, even within our own species. We can see evidence of recent human evolution, the prevalence of lactose tolerance in populations with a long history of dairy farming, adaptations to high altitudes in Andean and Tibetan populations, or changes in disease resistance in response to pathogens. The relentless arms race between humans and pathogens, like bacteria evolving antibiotic resistance, or viruses like influenza constantly mutating, is a clear, ever-present example of natural selection in action. We are also beginning to deliberately shape evolution through technologies like genetic engineering, raising profound ethical and practical questions about the future of life, including our own. What then is the future of life on Earth and our place within it? The slow dance will continue, with or without us. In the unimaginably distant future, billions of years from now, the sun will expand into a red giant, likely rendering Earth uninhabitable, or even engulfing it entirely. But before that ultimate cosmic end, there are still eons for life to continue its evolutionary journey. If humanity manages to navigate the profound challenges we face, climate change, resource depletion, biodiversity loss, what might our role be? Will we continue to be a force for rapid, perhaps destructive change? Or will we become conscious stewards, using our unique intelligence and technological prowess to preserve and even foster biodiversity, to guide the slow dance in a more harmonious direction? The story of evolution is not just a scientific narrative. It is a profound philosophical statement about our existence. It tells us that we are not separate from nature, but an intricate, deeply connected part of it. Every cell in our body, every gene in our DNA, carries the echoes of those first single cells, of the fish that crawled onto land, of the reptiles that mastered the continents, and the tiny mammals that endured in the shadows. We are literally animated by the same ancient energy, governed by the same fundamental principles of change and adaptation that have sculpted every living thing for billions of years. To truly understand the slow dance of evolution is to realize the fragility and the astonishing resilience of life. It is to appreciate the immense beauty born from endless cycles of variation, selection, adaptation, and extinction. It is to know that the world around us, from the smallest microbe to the largest whale, is a living library of billions of years of trial and error, of improbable successes and inevitable failures. And as we conclude this journey, looking back across the immeasurable gulf of deep time, we are left not just with scientific knowledge, but with a profound sense of wonder, connection, and perhaps responsibility. We are the latest, and in many ways the most impactful dancers on this ancient, ever-changing stage. The music of evolution plays on, and our steps, however brief in the grand cosmic scheme, will echo through the untold eons to come. What kind of legacy will our part in this slow dance leave? That, for the first time in Earth's long history, is a question that lies uniquely within our own hands,